Greetings, fellow humans. It's the end of the month, which means it's time to check in and do a monthly wrap up. June has been quite a month for me. It's definitely gone in a different direction than I would have guessed at the end of May. June is Pride Month, as I'm sure you're probably at least familiar with. I wasn't originally planning on reading only LGBT books this month, since there's always at least one LGBT book in each of my videos. At least. I don't always mention it, particularly if it's just like one or a few characters are LGBT, but it doesn't play an important part in plots. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see me do. Like, knowing there's LGBT rep, no matter how small, always gets me excited about a book. But maybe it's just me. But I had an ample amount of choices on my shelf and spanning different genres, so I was like, yeah, let's make this month entirely for LGBT reads. But on a more personal note, I actually just came out this month to my parents. I've been pretty open about being a lesbian on BookTube and on Twitter, but with my family it was kind of this unspoken but assumed thing. For a long time I was content with that arrangement. No one else is out in my family, so I found that to be really isolating and intimidating. I'm annoyed by the idea of being someone's only touchstone to LGBT issues. Like, that's an unfair burden to put on anyone. But I digress. As I mentioned in my last book haul video, I took a trip to Joshua Tree, California earlier this month. I went with my long-term girlfriend, and while we were away, we were finally able to indulge in living as if we were fully out. It was a beautiful experience, but having to return from that to being back in the closet was really hard. It made me question why I had accepted living the way I was, keeping a major part of my life secret from people who should be important to me. Not to mention, I think it was starting to impact my relationship with my family. I felt like a stranger around them most of the time. So I decided it was time. I'm really lucky because my parents responded fairly well to it. Again, a lot of it was assumed, just never said out loud, and I'm happy it's through with. I feel an immense weight taken off of me, and for once I truly feel like I can achieve the sort of life I want for myself. Of course, the annoying thing about coming out is that it's something that's ongoing for the rest of my life. Every time I meet someone new, I have to decide if I want to come out to them and how. But for a long time, I wasn't sure if I was going to have to live without my family, if they weren't accepting of me. So this one was the largest hurdle I think I am ever going to need to cross, and there's some relief to knowing that that part at least is over. I mentioned my own experience this past month because the books I've read this month definitely helped to encourage me with something that was very scary and vulnerable, as well as assured me that I am not alone. Representation matters, and I'm so blessed to have had these books with me on my journey. I'm so grateful that LGBT authors and stories are becoming more plentiful and even mainstream. I didn't have that when I was a teenager, and I can go into this more some other time if you're interested, but I'm happy to know that kids growing up now who need these stories will have them, just like I had them now when I needed them. So without further ado, let's dig into this month's picks. House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is an urban fantasy following main character Linus Baker, who works as a social worker for magical children, in particular where he surveys various orphanages of magical children for quality control. He is given a highly classified case to survey an orphanage who does things a little unorthodox, and that the children it houses are most unusual. One of the kids in question is the actual Antichrist. This was a book I buddy read with a handful of other booktubers, Leanne at Dark Roots Creations, Kristen at Moonlit Books, and Tiffany at Masquerade Chick. I had high expectations for this book, so I was prepared to be possibly let down. One of the things that discouraged me at the start was how flat of a character Linus Baker felt. He seemed almost cartoonish how dedicated to his work he was, and that the only book he carried with him and read routinely was the book of rules for his job. In fact, he references this rule book multiple times throughout the story, and it's very clear that he lives by the rules religiously. I kind of realized his character and his arc followed what I recognized to be a rom-com sort of development, like workaholic main character meets love interest who helps the main character reevaluate their priorities and ultimately brings out the best in them. Reading this book felt like watching a movie in a way that might only make sense to me. It wasn't so much that it vividly described, but more like the pacing and the beats followed what I could easily picture as a family-oriented fantasy film. I think Linus and his love interest, the man in charge of the orphanage Linus is sent to investigate, Arthur Parnassus, actually had really good chemistry. They're alike in some ways and challenge each other in other ways that positively impact the other to make good change for themselves. It's a slow burn romance, which I am always a sucker for, and left me at points wanting to shout, just kiss already. What worked best for me in this book was the social commentary. The story depicts a world in which not only do magical individuals exist, but these people are misunderstood and feared. The world strives to control them, stripping them of rights in the process. The focus is on these orphaned magical children, and it becomes painful at times to watch the ways people reject these innocent children because of how they were born. And I think that's a really clever choice on the author's part, as if saying if the world can't be friendly to them as children, how will it treat them as adults? I like that most of the conflict revolved around the character of Lucy, the actual Antichrist, who is a 6-year-old boy. Even as a reader, I found myself unsure about him at the start because of his birthrights. The book does an excellent job of getting readers to empathize with his character and understand how whether or not Lucy becomes evil is a choice, not a predetermined fate, and the love and support he receives as a developing youth will make all of the difference. I wish we saw a few more magical adults in the story, as well as there's kind of this implication that more often than not magical children end up orphaned, and there's not really an exploration into why. Is the implication that the parents often get killed or incarcerated and therefore are unintentionally absent in their kids' lives? Are some magical children born to normal adults who then reject them? Are they forcefully taken from magical parents in order to be able to control and indoctrinate them into a society, understanding that they are lesser and should be ashamed? And while I loved having a plus-size main character, I was kind of annoyed at how often his weight was the butt end of a joke. In fact, a good portion of the book is just nearly every character ragging on Linus, which is humorous, but whenever the joke revolves around his weight, it's just kind of tasteless. I do like that Linus himself is insecure about his body at the beginning, but I mean, after all of the teasing, why wouldn't he be? But then later grows to accept and love himself by the end of the book. In fact, he's still fat by the end of the novel, but also really happy and satisfied with himself and life. Since I wrote this script, there's been a new critical piece written about this book that has gained a lot of traction, discussing an interview in which TJ Klune says he drew inspiration from the storyline from Canadian residential schools. I'm going to drop the link to the article below because I don't think I'm the right person to talk on this issue, but it's worth reading. Upright Woman Wanted by Sarah Gailey. This is a science fiction dystopian novella. After the execution of Esther's girlfriend, Esther joins the Librarians, a troupe of women who travel by caravan to distribute state-approved literature. Librarians are viewed as morally upright and celibate individuals, and Esther hopes their image can save her soul as she believes she is damned for being a lesbian. She quickly learns that the librarians aren't as they initially seem, and that perhaps she has finally found her people. With strong imagery of the Old West, I thought going into this book it took place in the past, albeit perhaps an alternate universe past. It's slowly revealed throughout the story that this is actually the future, where the once United States is at war with each other and all resources are allocated to fight in this war, leaving the average citizen to live as if in olden times. Early on, it's revealed that two of the women, Leda and Bet, are in a relationship with each other. Bet is also implied to be transgender in a conversation where Esther learns Bet joined the Librarians in order to avoid being conscripted into the army. Esther relays her confusion as women aren't supposed to be soldiers, and you can make the connection from there. Sai, the love interest of this book, is non-binary, using they-them pronouns. In fact, I like that all major characters in this book are some form of LGBT. Esther's plot revolves entirely around her learning to accept herself. She knows from before the start of the book that she isn't attracted to men like society thinks she should be. She believes that witnessing her girlfriend being executed is her punishment for her sexuality, as well as she keeps warning the librarians that she is a magnet for bad luck. She genuinely believes she is destined for tragedy. A large factor for why she thinks this way is because of what she grew up reading. In the world she lives in, literature is highly regulated, and the only books she read featuring characters like herself who aren't straight, their lives always ended in misery. I like the very believable way this is used to cultivate Esther's beliefs. Why would she think anything else after constantly being exposed to this propaganda? It relays the importance of representation, as well as reflect what has happened in real life. It used to be the only way LGBT fiction could be published was if the story ended in tragedy. This was to discourage anyone from choosing to be gay or acting on their own sexuality by sending the message that, hey, gay people don't get happy endings. Gay people die horrifically or are shunned from society. So it really made me happy to see this used in a book about librarians as well as a dystopian, because it fits so beautifully and it's very appropriate too. But with the librarians, Esther finally has the opportunity to witness a happy and open lesbian relationship while traveling with Bet and Leda. And it's the first time she's ever considered that maybe she can live a happy, fulfilling life herself. While being on the road between civilizations all the time allows the privacy, which enables Bet, Leda, and Sai to live authentically, they aren't complacent either. They use the guise of handing out state-approved literature from town to town to work as couriers for the rebellion. And while in the end the rebellion has not yet won, the book ends on a note that they aren't alone, and that there are so many others who believe in their cause and are fighting for it, which I think was the perfect way to wrap up the overall message, particularly in regards to sexuality. Reading this, I thought to myself, while there's still hate, there's a lot of people out there who are LGBT or are supporters, and though I can't always see them, they are there and I'm not alone. Yesterday is History by Kosoko Jackson. This is a young adult romance with light science fiction elements. Andre Cobb is a teenage cancer survivor receiving a life-saving liver transplant just when he needed it. But what he didn't know is that his donor was a time traveler, and now with his transplant, Andre is able to jump back into time. On his first jump, he meets a lively and free-spirited boy named Michael living in the early 70s. The two immediately hit it off, and Andre realizes he is somehow tethered to Michael. Back in present day, Andre is approached by Claire McIntyre, the mother of his organ donor, who is also a time traveler. Together with her son Blake, they help Andre understand his newfound powers. I love the concept. I was especially excited to see a story about a black character being able to time travel, since the genre isn't particularly friendly to marginalized people, particularly black people. I'm glad Andre was never subjected to racism while traveling into the past. The book doesn't pretend that racism doesn't exist. There's several points throughout the book where Andre points out white characters' ignorance to his experience as a black person. All of these taking place in the present day since it's still an issue today. But there's no graphic depictions of racism in the book, which I think was a good choice. Obviously, the author wanted to give a fun time travel story to a black character without derailing that experience with racism. The idea of gaining powers from a transplanted organ was really cool and unique, as well as having characters who were born with the ability and could lose them with time, like Greg, the father of Andre's donor, or even be born into the family of time travelers without the ability, like Blake, the other love interest in the story. As much as I like the world building, I found that much of it was told rather than shown. There's 3 major rules of time travel, and when Andre is about to break one of them, namely the don't alter the past rule, Claire intervenes and explains what happens if you break this rule. Which, I almost would have liked to have seen Andre getting routinely frustrated by putting out one fire and finding 2 more, like Claire warned him would happen, rather than just being told about it. He also broke another rule about needing to return to the present time before making another jump into the past, and nothing happened when he did this. When Blake first told him about this rule, Andre questioned why, and Blake didn't have an answer, so it just feels really trivial that there isn't a justification why this is a rule. It could have been left out. I also felt that Blake teaching Andre about time travel was a weak excuse for them to spend time together because, first of all, Blake isn't a time traveler. Clearly, Claire knows more than he does and is more experienced and better equipped for the job. Secondly, besides telling Andre the 3 rules, there doesn't seem to be anything else Andre needed to work on. Like, Andre jumps for the first time on his own, and while sometimes in the beginning he'd accidentally jump without meaning to, him gaining control over jumps doesn't seem to be related at all to his practice with Blake. In fact, none of these lessons are something that is actually shown in the book, but rather just mentioned in passing. Like I said, a lot of this book is just told and not shown. I found character motivations to be inconsistent and jumping from one extreme to another with little to no development in between. I wasn't sure if this was an intentional choice, as Andre's life is shattered and split between 2 time periods, and the author wished to reflect that with Andre's personal relations. Blake, upon meeting Andre, is angry and doesn't want anything to do with him. Yet shortly after, he agrees to help teach Andre about time travel and is really nice to him. Isabel, Andre's best friend, spends most of the book being critical of Andre spending time with the McIntyre family, yet when Blake asks Andre out, she talks Andre into giving him a chance. She doesn't seem to like Blake or his family, so why would she be advocating for her best friend to go out with him? His parents get angry at Andre for lying about where he was, which was being with Blake. And then Andre gets grounded, during which time Blake lies about having a class project together so they could spend time together, and somehow his parents go for this very weak lie, and next chapter they're just cool and okay with them spending time together. It's implied with Andre's parents' outburst that lying is unacceptable to them, and I have a hard time believing they'd never catch on about the project lie and be either equally upset about that or even like, I don't know, maybe realize they were being too harsh on Andre, that he's a good kid and has missed out on so much in life while he was fighting cancer, so they'll try to be more understanding in the future. It just felt like there were scenes missing. A majority of the book is so focused around the time Andre spends with either love interest, but realistic relationships with other characters in the book suffer because of this. Like, I'm genuinely surprised there wasn't a point where Isabel got angry at Andre for blowing her off all the time to spend time with Blake, because he did. In fact, I don't see much point to Isabel's character, since she only ever acted in a way which was convenient to Andre rather than being a fully realized creation. I liked interactions between Andre and Claire and the sort of found family dynamic that appeared there. However, Andre has a very loving, supporting relationship with his own family, yet his own parents are so rarely in the story. He never even comes close to telling them about time travel or Michael, and I kind of wish he did to show how much he trusts his own parents, even if he fudged the details a little bit and only told half-truths. I think that would have shown the dynamic that the author otherwise told us existed between Andre and his parents. I also felt that development between Andre and both love interests was pretty shallow. There was a lot of, and we talked for hours, or, and I saw him every day for a month, rather than including scenes of actual bonding between characters. I honestly didn't see chemistry between either of them, but also I've seen this happen so often in heterosexual young adult romances that I don't even know if I can criticize this. Like, straight romances will be like, they're a boy and a girl who spend a lot of time together, so of course they catch feelings. So, fair. So needless to say, I was disappointed by this read. I think it has its audience. If you're mostly into the romance love triangle aspect, then you would probably like this read more than I did. Mostly, I think it left a lot of potential unexplored, and I think that's a shame. I think it really could have been a book that blew me away, but also I can respect that maybe Kosoko Jackson wanted it to just be a romance with a fun twist of time travel. Not every book has to be that deep. Crier's War by Nina Varela. This is a young adult medieval fantasy set science fiction. Humankind has grown discontent with living as inferior beings to the Automa, a species of human-like machines who overthrew their creators during the War of Kinds. Ayla, a human whose family was brutally slaughtered by the Automa sovereign, is determined to get her revenge by killing the sovereign's daughter, Crier. Crier is promised to marry Kosoko, a conniving and powerful Automa with dangerous ideas of how to improve the Automa species while dwindling the humans to extinction. The two are brought together when Ayla saves Crier from falling to her death. Ayla witnesses Crier crying, something Automa shouldn't be able to do, while Crier notices Ayla possesses an heirloom necklace she isn't allowed to have. Both women discover they might be fighting for the same things after all. I'll read young adult on occasion, and usually I like it enough, but it's not my preference. But this is the first young adult I've read in a while that I've really been impressed by. The pacing in this book is incredible, with lots of twists and turns that kept my interest throughout. I don't think there was a single moment where I felt that the book was dragging, and the actual writing is really beautiful and complex. I like the way the book took a science fiction plot and put it into a fantasy setting. Some of the technology behind Automa and various made objects is less scientifically explained and appears to be more magic-based. And I like how lore is injected into the book with these 1 to 2 page long excerpts from various historical accounts. I also like the role reversal that happens in this book. Often with androids, they're seen as the lesser humans, as objects, and as servants. The lore of the book indicates that the first Automa was created to be a child to a queen who could not conceive her own. Automa were initially loved and welcomed as family to humans before the War of Kinds, after which Automa became the ones in power and the ones who oppressed the humans. It really subverts the expectations of a humans versus androids sort of plot. As for the romance that blooms between our two main characters, I love the tension at the start where Ayla is so hell-bent on killing Crier. Maybe I just really like enemies to lovers tropes. Ayla becomes Crier's handmaiden, and what I like about this plot is just how Crier is the first to fall for Ayla. Well, Ayla sort of reluctantly takes care of Crier, but also thinks she is mostly using Crier for her own gains, but is also starting to get soft on her. There's just a lot of wonderful tension build and release between these two characters as their plots develop and interweave with each other. They're tied together by more than just mutual attraction, which I really liked. They have common goals which make them reluctant allies, and as the reader, I understand that their partnership is genuinely what's ultimately going to allow them to succeed in the end. Of course, this had to be yet another first book in the series. Fortunately, this one is a duology, so the plot will wrap up within the second book, and I really look forward to reading the next book, which I don't currently have, so it might be a bit. Local Star by Aimee Ogden. I started reading this one back in May, but I decided to put it on hold because I got 2 chapters in and I wasn't really feeling it at the time. I love space opera, but I do get burned out on it, and that's definitely what happened. I've just been reading so many in a row that when I got to this one, I was like, I need a change of pace. As you can see, I've had a nice break this month so far, so I figured I'd finish up with this book. Local Star is a space opera set science fiction. Main character Triz has come from the lowest possible social class, having grown up in the trash heaps of a space station. Now she works as a mechanic with her girlfriend, Kasne's father, who doesn't approve of his daughter's choices. When Kasne gets arrested for war crimes, Triz is forced to team up with her ex-boyfriend, Kalo, to prove her innocence. What drew me to this book was the polyamory plot. What I didn't realize until I started reading was that in this future, polyamory is more than common. It's become a norm, which I thought was pretty neat. I'm not polyamorous myself, but I like exploring different family structures, particularly in science fiction, and I like when polyamory is done well, rather than including some sort of jealousy plot. That's definitely the case with this book. Kasne has a wife, but both her and the wife love and include Triz in their relationship. Kasne also has a history with Kalo and tried setting him up with Triz as well, hoping to include him in their family, but is sensitive to the fact that it didn't work out between them. There's obvious open communication in the relationship, and most conflict comes from Triz assuming she doesn't belong because of her low social standing, something her partners and family strives to prove wrong. Also, Kasne comes from 4 parents, which offers a neat perspective from an older relationship and what the future of Kasne and Triz's relationship might look like, as well as each parent offers something different in the way of raising Kasne. I also love the use of neo-pronouns. This was the first time I've seen e-er, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love every time I see it in science fiction, and I hope it does become increasingly more common within the genre, and hopefully others too. There's a lot of world building fit into such a small book, and at times things aren't explained so much as they are implied. While I personally don't love reading paragraph upon paragraph of explanation, I did find it to be almost too light at times. There's a glossary at the end of the book to define and explain various vocab, which helps some, but I would have liked to have seen more of it incorporated into the book, since needing to pause to flip to the back of the book to look at the glossary interrupted the flow of reading. At one point, I found myself doubting some of the science in the book. Even though I know this is a story and things are made up, it's just the first time ever while reading science fiction that I've experienced disbelief. Also, some of the tech just sounded really cool, and I would have liked for the book to have dwelled on it just a little bit longer. Character development also felt a bit crunched, but it was forgivable for the length of the book. And that concludes my month of LGBT reads by LGBT authors, though Pride Month is every month for me. If any of these titles interest you and you like to support independent bookstores while also supporting me, I've got my bookshop affiliate link in the description below. Thanks for hanging out with me, and let me know how the month went for you.